What's going to happen is that we're going to get each of the moderators from the 3 workshop sessions to give an overview of the discussion that took place, and then if there's some comment or further discussions, then we'd like to capture that in this session as well. So over to you, Bettina.
So thanks for coming to the plenary session. We bring back all your comments and discussions. So Inigo is going to start off with offshore wind, and if you could present in 5 to 10 minutes what was discussed, but then there's a general discussion following on.
Thank you, Bettina. So again, we had a very nice discussion with representatives from Portugal, Spain, Romania, and Ireland. And basically what we try to do is just try to organize the different barriers that we found in our discussion. So we divided into 3 parts: the technological barriers, the environmental barriers, and the socioeconomic barriers. So, and within the technological barriers, we've been discussing problems in the predictability. We've seen already that tidal is relatively simple, waves is a little bit more complicated, and wind is the most complicated one. And we feel that there is a lack of diagnostics and observations. There are a lot of numerical modeling, but still we need to understand what is the behavior of the wind offshore, and especially look into what are the local effects that need to be considered, what are the wake effects on the different turbines, what is the effect of turbulence, how this is going to be affecting the machines, and how this is affecting the different elements. So we feel that this is the first one to be tackled. We found also that there are several ones in the manufacturing and the logistic chain. And here we think that offshore energy has an advantage compared to wave and tidal, based on the fact that onshore wind energy has a lot of things in common. So there's already a lot of information. But we still think that there are major limitations, especially depending on the technology you're using. If you're using bottom fixed ones or floating devices, for the bottom fixed, you need much better port facilities, you need shipyards, you need specific water depths and storage areas, and not all the harbors in Europe do satisfy the needs for the future development of this kind of technology. So there is a limitation that needs to be tackled in the future, especially in terms of infrastructure. But there's also a high dependency on steel markets, and the steel market is very variable and volatile. So these are easy things that need to be considered. And another option is that we feel that there are new opportunities with concrete foundations like GBS, because construction and cement has decreased, and therefore we feel that this could be also a good opportunity for the future. In terms of installation, transportation and grid integration is still a thing that needs to, it's a big barrier. The deployment is a problem. We are aware of the fact that there is a big plan for a new grid network for the Northern Europe, with Northern Europe coverage, but unfortunately in the southern of Europe there is not much about this, or in the Mediterranean, where there is also some possibilities for the deployment of offshore wind technologies. There are much discussion on how to change completely the way in which the cable are built right now, or how to find solutions in which substations are no longer required. And we feel that this is also a barrier that needs to be tackled. So there are also some other issues connected to the kind of technologies. If we think about the development of the floating devices, or if we think about the development in countries with a narrow shelf, like the ones in the southern Europe, the technology may change a lot depending on the distance. And now we're going into farther distances, and this may require new technologies now for the grid network and energy evacuation that are not fully covered right now. The other issue is the operability. People in wind energy have come from offshore wind energy, think that accessing the farm is easy. For offshore, this is not the case. So there is a big need to improve offshore access and operation to reduce the costs and the risks for people and for the environment. There is a need to study how to limit the operation failures. Again, the same, if you have failure, you may not be able to access the farm in 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and this has a lot of problems in terms of economic loss. to explore the energy or converting schemes and the coexistence with our applications like aquaculture, wave energy, and hydrolysis. Those are some opportunities that we find that are interesting. Then in terms of sustainability, we have to improve our knowledge of extreme conditions. What is going on with biofouling, corrosion, so we can think about new or different kinds of materials like the one that we've seen. And here we feel that improving materials and coatings or try to improve the prediction of extremes, the diagnostic and statistics of combined wind waves and currents is something that needs to be done in the future. And in terms of reliability, several farms, many farms have been already built. So we feel that monitoring is very, very relevant to understand how reliable the designs are. We should try to improve structural design and again biofouling materials and so on. And finally, one of the things that we've been discussing is that the fact that affordability should be analyzed in a holistic way, including costs, performance, survival, and of course also environmental impacts and so on. And this should be done taking into consideration lifetime design that is going to be most probably over 20 years. If we talk about environmental barriers, wildlife affection is something that's still not well known. We feel that there is a clear need to get much better baseline information. We need more monitoring. We need to understand some of the impacts of processes related to benthic communities, birds, mammals, and other species that still we don't understand. We need more standardized and better environmental assessments, accumulated impact assessments, and then also something that we've been discussing is the issue of proportionality. There are many species that are already protected in Europe and many other places, and we feel that depending on the size and the impact of the farm, we may consider that some of the species could be affected if the impact is proportional. And also another thing that needs to be studied much more is the impact due to increased construction footprint. If we think about a massive deployment of wind energy, this is going to be a big issue. And the final thing is more thinking in a longer term is to look into the impact of the scale of the offshore wind global expansion. If the objective is met of reducing the cost of offshore wind energy and get similar costs as the one that we're getting onshore, we should expect, due to the fact that we have a lot of space available in the ocean, that there's going to be a massive development of offshore wind energy. And this could have large-scale impacts in terms of spatial large-scale impact, even affecting the atmospheric boundary layer and other issues that should be considered. And the last one, the socioeconomic barriers, public acceptance. We feel that, especially in Southern Europe, this is a very problematic issue since we have the coexistence of this kind of developments together with tourism, fishing, and other issues of great importance for the economy of the southern countries. The public awareness, the stakeholder engagement from the very beginning, financial issues, of course, this is probably one of the burning issues nowadays. The streamlining of legal and permitting processes. I was giving the colleagues the example that in Spain, if you want to develop something like this, you need to get reports and permission from about 27 institutions. Harmonizing offshore wind with other uses like fishing, or fishes, and tourism. And competition with other energy sources, like the cases that we are seeing in several countries in which you don't know if you want to develop photovoltaic, onshore wind, or even shale gas or others. And the last one is that we feel that this is not a barrier, it's more a recommendation that I think that we've seen that in Ireland, that's the case, that we should try to convince policymakers that policy strategies should be put in place for community integration and development of offshore wind energy from the very beginning. And this is the summary. Thank you for your attention.
Very much. Or do you want to stay? There might be questions or discussion. Yeah, maybe, yeah, if we do it one by one. Are there any further comments, maybe from people who have been to the other groups?
Thank you very much. Just a quick comment on the scope for co-location of wave devices with offshore wind devices and whether that's a pipe dream, because I know there are some Green Ocean Energy, for instance, have trialed models on that. Just a quick comment on that.
Well, I mean, It depends a lot. I mean, we've been looking into this kind of schemes, but mostly in which we try to make the integration of wave with floating turbines. And this, we think it's possible, but my personal feeling is that the most smart idea is, instead of trying to integrate everything in the same platform, is just to use the same ocean space for different applications, but trying to integrate all the energy evacuation, substations, foundations, and so on. I don't think that this is a better idea. To me, this is a better idea than try to develop technologies in which you try to integrate everything in the same platform.
Okay, thanks very much. The next feedback is from the tidal range and stream workshop. There was quite a lengthy presentation by Stuart, so I think Roger might not have as much to report on our discussion.
Depends how much you wrote. Well, we had Stuart in our group. Stuart Anderson is a very interesting person, actually. He's a retired GP, and it's worth commenting because he's engaged in renewable energy on the North Wales coast. And he's been involved in a lot of projects on the North Wales coast for some time, but he's phenomenally capable in terms of stakeholder engagement. He involves a huge and diverse community in stakeholder engagement along the North Wales coast. And if you go to any meetings he holds along the North Wales coast, there can be 300 people at the meeting. So he involves people from, and many of those people live nowhere near the coast, so they are interested in renewable energy. Anyway, he came to our session, and I put Mike in a difficult position, I think, gave a talk. It's difficult to stop him, and I was asked to just let him speak for 15, 20 minutes, but that was going to be pretty well impossible. So he spoke for about 25, 30 minutes. It was an interesting talk, covering a wide range of topics, as we'll all agree. Anyway, so there are political barriers. This is a big problem with many of the issues in tidal barriers, impoundments and so forth. We see this all the time. It's a very major issue. We're seeing this now in particular with the Sem barrage, for example. It's one of the biggest challenges we face. And this is one of the big advantages of having people like Stuart Anderson on board, because along the North Wales coast, for example, where there are proposals to put a lot of impoundments, there's a lot of enthusiasm by the local community to build these impoundments along the North Wales coast. You don't see that in other places. And that's almost single-handedly due to his commitment. And he's pulled the local councillors on board, he's pulled the local community on board, and all the environmentalist groups are very much on board there. And I think that's a big plus from that perspective. The difficulty is, however, comes to this point. The projects along the North Wales coast are relatively small. And in my experience, it's quite difficult to get investment in relatively small projects. There are investors out there with the big bucks to invest in the large projects, like, for example, a Sem barrage project. But they're not there in the same way to invest in the much smaller projects, the coastally attached impoundments. And that's what I'm finding from my own experience. I'm involved in this Sem barrage project, and further down the line, the £30 billion. It's much easier to get the £30 billion to build a project of that scale. These are all now in the private sector, from the sovereign wealth funds in particular, and the Middle East and the large pension funds. And they see that once the wall is built, that the barrage or the impoundment will produce cheap energy, very cheap energy afterwards. But to build the £500,000 or £2 billion relatively small impoundment, it's much more difficult to get money in that sort of range. So having the Stuart Andersons of this world, the people that can pull the stakeholders on board, it's actually a very big plus. So I will make that point. I think a lot of the points we didn't really have a lot of discussion in the end because Stuart took up a lot of time. He's been pushing the two-way generation for a long time, and I think that has been a big plus in many respects. Environmental barriers are a major problem in impoundments and barrages, particularly fish. We go from one extreme to the other. We find many organisations are happy to have turbines, for example, which will allow a small percentage of fish kills, but then the other extreme, they want zero fish kills, and you can never really guarantee that. I'm involved, it's not an area of expertise of mine, but I'm involved in the discussions with some of the organisations that are concerned with the Sem barrage at the moment, and they're demanding pretty well that we have zero fish kills with any of the turbines. You can't guarantee that. But it is a big problem, fish passage through turbines. So this is a huge area for research in my experience at the moment. Resource limitation of many sites. Well, outside areas like the UK, for example, and Ireland, where you have relatively large tidal range, there are many parts of the world like Spain, for example, and Portugal, where you don't have, well, less so Portugal, but Spain, for example, in the Mediterranean, where you don't have large tidal range, so it's not... public opinion, well, we did discuss this after Stuart had gone. We get these large meetings up in North Wales. Stuart gets the 300 people there, and then, of course, he takes us down a route, actually, which then gets into the very technical detail on pumping efficiency and so forth, and the general public are not usually particularly interested in the technical details of how one turbine operates relative to another and pumping efficiency. They're more interested in the big picture, cyclopaths and museums and so forth. So in my view, Stuart rather shoots himself in the foot here, because having got the people to the arena, we then get into very technical discussion, as you saw the other day when I was presenting on the Sem barrage, for example. How can these barriers be overcome? Well, his view very much is that we should engage much more with local government, and I share that view. I think the more we can involve local government, that's one of the reasons why we're keen to have him at these meetings, although we do have the problem then that we have long presentations and so forth. And he had 3 other people here from other local authorities with him at this meeting, which was very useful from our point of view in Wales. I think Bettina's done a good job in keeping him here. Small-scale barrage impoundment projects. Well, he's very keen on developing small-scale impoundment projects along the North Wales coast at the moment, and hydro power projects, pump storage projects, and those are coming to fruition. I'm trying to work with the Welsh Government to see if we can develop some of these ideas. Floating platform for the case with fish passage. What's the point you've got there? On the second page.
Oh, this is planned to have those platforms on one of his plans.
Bettina took these notes. I can hardly read them because the font size is too small. And I don't know what font she's using. Sorry. Okay, I think I've covered important to get local and regional support for ocean energy projects. Do you want to add anything?
No, that's perfect.
Okay, as I say, our session was pretty well dominated by a wandering presentation from Stuart. Okay, any questions?
Was we had started to touch on a little bit of discussion about strategic environmental assessments, and I think, you know, the one thing that's sort of not in here really that I'd like to see is you know, one of the barriers I think is that we get fixated on one type of project and don't actually start to look at all the alternatives, and I think that's a big issue for me.
Well, I did. I presented on the Sem barrage project, but I have been involved in. We have looked at quite a lot of the projects in the UK, There's the Mersey, Solway Firth. We haven't looked at any projects outside the UK. But most of the other projects outside the UK, cost is a big factor here. I've been involved in the discussions with the government. And when you look at the cost, the cost of power, it's very expensive for barrages and impoundments, other than the Severn. When you look at the other estuaries, I looked at the Mersey, which was the second cheapest, and it's very much more expensive than the Severn. So the cost is usually the big problem at the moment anyway, in my experience. The Mersey was very quickly way over budget, even with or without pumping.
So also, there have been quite a few studies in the Severn looking at different options, but I think it always comes back to the resource. It's just so much bigger for a Severn barrage that I think people don't realize what the difference is and the potential you could get out from one scheme.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Roger. So that brings us to the last of the workshop summaries from Carlos, and that group looked into the barriers to developing wave energy.
Well, I must confess I was very much impressed with the list that Inigo managed to do within the workshop. We were not able to do that in our workshop. In fact, I didn't manage to have anything written in a PowerPoint or whatever. We have discussed different aspects, and during the discussion, it was made clear that there were many problems and difficulties, but one thing were problems, the other thing were barriers. Yes, as the result of the discussion, I guess we found two main barriers. People were very much engaged with the difficulties with the environmental impact assessment studies that are required, and this was felt as being really a barrier to the development. And there was a bit of discussion around this and several suggestions on ways that one could go around this problem. It was felt that it doesn't make sense that each developer has to do data collection on mammals and birds and all of these. And also that data collected by some developers then is not made use by others, and everybody has to start from scratch each time. There was a suggestion that this type of data collection should be done at the national level or even transnational level, and made available as a database that then developers could use to do their further studies. There was also identified that in this process the attitude of people is very much also a problem, in that authorities generally do not take the cooperative approach to the problem, and they take sort of an adversary approach that keep asking and keep creating difficulties instead of trying to help to come up with the right conclusions. So those were main aspects that were related with the environmental impact assessment, which in fact is part of the consenting process, and there it was also felt the need that there should be some legislation in the process that could also specify duration of the different phases, so that people would have some idea of how long this process could take and could plan accordingly. Yeah, well, there were several other things discussed. When you collect data, you need to standardize and this and that, but I think those were aspects that probably were not so critical. Well, passing this stage of the consent, then we were discussing installation. And the feeling there was that, of course, there are difficulties with installation, developing the right procedure for the right device. But the main problem that it was identified was the lack of geotechnical data. And here again, the request came back to the authorities. It was felt that geotechnical data should be collected nationally and made available to developers, because it is very costly if each developer has to do their own geotechnical studies. So I think the plan was then to go on after installation to look at operability, maintenance and other things, but then we started having visitors and we stopped the discussion. So we identified as two important barriers: the environmental impact assessment and then the lack of geotechnical data for the installation phase. I'm sure there are many other problems, but the question is we need also to separate problems that developers will have the ability to solve from barriers that are really constraining the development of the industry as a whole. So these were the conclusions. Of course, they reflect the people that were here, and that's as far as we managed to go. Thank you.
Are there any further comments? Yes.
Okay, I have a comment applied actually for the three technologies, and it's related with the environmental assessment that I am missing a bit in all of this. We have been through impact, through environmental assessment in terms of, okay, what happened with fishes, with other issues, but then I think it's important as well to get what is the monetary value of the biodiversity, or things like a landscape intrusion, which are things that goes very in line with the local opposition to this kind of projects. And then cost-benefit analysis in general are not including these values, because there are environmental values. What is the value of the biodiversity? What is the value of the landscape, etc. So there are a couple of externalities in this issue that are not really accounted, and I think that it's important to include research in these terms, because cost-benefit analysis can really change when you include the value of externalities. And it has been the case, at least with my experience, of hydropower developments against renewable energy sources in places like Chile, in which hydropower developments were much cheaper, but they were not considering in assessment, in environmental assessments and in cost-benefit analysis, the value of these issues, like what was the value of the environmental loss, but economic figures of this, landscape and resettlements and things like that. And when they consider this kind of figures, in some cases, the cost-benefit analysis changed a lot, and the conclusion of the assessment as well. So this is a bit of the things I was missing for all the technologies, actually.
Well, you're right, this can be done, but it's just a matter of standardize the methodology. These kind of things are done in many different applications, and externalities can be included, or into the cost-benefit analysis, introducing hedonic prices if you're looking into the impact on tourism or other approaches. And also you can look into the cost for the services provided by certain ecosystems that are going to be affected. This can be done, but I mean, I think that the only problem is that the existing developments so far have been too much focused on trying to reduce the direct costs, and probably did not include this kind of approximations in the assessment, but this obviously can be done. But I think it's a good point, yeah.
It was just a comment because some more research is also needed in that part in order to equilibrate these other areas.
Well, I think you have a point, and several other people have also a point. But once in a while, I find myself thinking, really, how much effort are we putting in developing technology, and how much effort we are putting to study its impact? And really, sometimes I'm a bit. Well, I don't know if sometimes we are not putting too much emphasis on the impact studies instead of developing the technology itself.
Any other comments? Okay. Thanks very much then for the three of you for leading the workshops and getting the information back to us. Mike has kindly asked me to close the conference, which I'm very happy to do. So the success of the Maren project highly depends on the stakeholder involvement and on how we can get our results to the stakeholders. So you really make all the difference. So thanks for coming to this conference and for being part of the Maren project. So we hope to continue doing this. We are applying for a Maren 2 project at the moment. It's very interesting, your comments of the other costs. We will be looking, or the plan is to look more into including other environmental costs as well, or trying to put value on those changes. So we'll take that with us in finalizing that application. We have got some other ideas as well, so hopefully there will be quite a few follow-on projects from this one. We've found a good team and hopefully can work together, keep working together, also with you then as the growing stakeholder group. I think we all agree that it has been very impressive to see what the Irish are doing in the field of marine renewables, the support they are getting, but also the technologies that they are developing. So it looks like the leap that is required to get this industry off the ground is kind of happening, also in Scotland, and I think all of the Atlantic area countries are trying to get there. And what I personally think that we have to work together to get there. Possibly we're all a bit too small to do that on our own, so we can learn so much from each other. We share, especially the wave energy, the offshore wind. We all have those resources, so we can learn a lot from each other and work together. And this has been a very good way of starting this. So all that's left really is to thank Mike and his team for hosting a very successful conference and being very good hosts. Have looked after us very well, and I've really enjoyed the quality of the presentations, of the discussions going on as well. Thank you, Mike.